So let me tell you about a woman called Charity Aiyedogbon. Now, if I told you she met a man on Facebook, fell in love, and believed she had found someone she could trust, you probably wouldn't think much of it. Because honestly, that's how a lot of relationships starts these days. It's a message, a conversation, and then before you know it, you're talking every single day. But Charity had no idea that this relationship would eventually become the center of a murder investigation. Now, before we get into everything that happened, let's first talk about Charity. Charity Aiyedogbon was a 44-year-old businesswoman living in Abuja, Nigeria. She wasn't just known for her business, she was also quite active on Facebook, where many people knew her by the name Deep Deal Chacha Dehama. She was the co-owner of Chavid Limited, a family business that included a fashion design outfit and a restaurant. The name Chavid was a combination of Charity and David, her husband's name. Although Charity was still legally married, she and her husband had been separated for about 2 years. After roughly 15 years of marriage, the relationship had broken down and the two were living separate lives. Their 4 children lived with their father, while Charity had moved into a rented apartment in Gwarimpa, Abuja, where she was trying to rebuild her life. So, when people later found out that Charity had started dating again, it wasn't because she was trying to hide anything or live a double life. She had been separated for years and, like many people in a situation, was simply hoping to find happiness. Little did she know that her search for a fresh start would lead her to someone she met on Facebook. At some point during the new chapter of her life, Charity met a man named Paul Oswego. Like many modern relationships, theirs didn't begin through family or mutual friends. It started online. The two reportedly connected on Facebook, where they began chatting regularly. At first, it was just conversations here and there, but over time, those conversations became more frequent. Before long, they were talking almost every day. Unlike Charity, very little was publicly known about Paul Oswego. He was originally from Anambra State and was living in Abuja when he and Charity met. To those around him, he came across as soft-spoken and approachable, certainly not someone who would later find himself at the center of a murder investigation. When Paul and Charity connected on Facebook, there was nothing that immediately raised alarm bells. Like thousands of other people using social media to make friends or find love, they simply started talking. Their conversations became more frequent. One message turned into daily chats, and before long, the two began dating officially. According to investigators, the relationship lasted for about a year, during which Paul became a regular part of Charity's life. To Charity, this probably felt like the fresh start she had been hoping for after the breakdown of her marriage. But beneath what appeared to be an ordinary relationship, investigators would later allege that a much darker story was quietly unfolding. To Charity, Paul represented something she hadn't had in a long time, a chance to start over. She had already been through the emotional weight of a broken marriage. She wasn't a teenager chasing butterflies anymore. She was a grown woman, a mother of 4, running a business and trying to rebuild her life. If she was going to let another man into a world, she had every reason to believe he was worth the risk. And for about a year, that's exactly what it looked like. Friends and people around them knew they were together. It wasn't some secret affair hidden from the world. Charity genuinely seemed to believe that she had found someone who she could build a future with. But like many relationships, not everything was as perfect as it appeared on the surface. People would later whisper that the relationship had its ups and downs, and there were moments when the couple reportedly separated but found their way back to each other. Whether those were ordinary relationship disagreements or signs of something much deeper is something only the two of them truly know. Whatever the case, neither Charity nor the people who loved her could have imagined where this relationship was heading. At first, nothing about Charity's life suggested she was in danger. She was still running her business, still speaking to friends and family, and still trying to build a future for herself. But behind the scenes, something has started to change. According to people close to Charity, she had begun receiving threats from unknown individuals. Nobody seemed to know who was sending them. Nobody knew exactly what they wanted, but whatever those messages contained, they frightened Charity. This wasn't someone who suddenly became scared overnight. The threats were serious enough that she reportedly decided to increase the security around her home. She hired a technician to install CCTV cameras in her apartment. Now, we don't know exactly what was going on through Charity's mind at the time. Maybe she thought someone was watching her, or maybe she simply wanted peace of mind. Whatever the reason, she clearly felt unsafe enough to take action. Then, on Monday, May 9th, 2016, something happened that would later confuse everyone who knew her. On Facebook, Charity made what seemed like a completely innocent post. She told her friends she was going on a road trip. Nothing about the post appeared suspicious. If you saw it at the time, you probably would have scrolled right past it. It sounded like the kind of update people post every day without giving it a second thought. But after Charity disappeared, that single post took on a completely different meaning. For the next day or so, nothing seemed unusual. After all, Charity was an adult. She had her own life, her own business, and her own routine. If she didn't answer her phone for a few hours, nobody would immediately assume the worst. But as hours turned into an entire day, people started noticing something wasn't right. Calls to Charity's phone went unanswered. Text messages weren't replied to. She wasn't returning anyone's call. At first, the people closest to her tried to reassure themselves. Maybe she's busy. Maybe her phone battery died. Maybe she's traveling. After all, hadn't she just posted on Facebook that she was going on a road trip? It seemed like a reasonable explanation. But another day passed, and then another, and still nothing. By now, the concern was beginning to spread. Friends started calling one another. Have you spoken to Charity? No, I thought she was with you. I haven't heard from her since. One by one, everyone gave the same answer. Nobody knew where Charity was. The woman who usually stayed in touch with the people around her had suddenly gone completely silent. And that wasn't like her. Charity would not just pack up and leave on a whim. Besides, she had a business to run. Eventually, her family and close friends decided they couldn't just sit around waiting anymore. They went to Charity's apartment in Warimpa. At first, they hoped there would be a simple explanation. Maybe she was asleep, maybe she had left in a hurry. But the moment they stepped inside, they realized something wasn't adding up. The apartment didn't look like someone had packed for a trip. Her personal belongings were still there. Her clothes hadn't been packed. There was no suitcase missing. And according to reports, there was even a pot of stew still sitting on the cooker. It looked as though Charity had expected to come back, not leave. That was the moment panic truly set in. Because if Charity hadn't gone on a trip, then where was she? With no sign of Charity and no contact from her for several days, her family officially reported her missing to the police. Now, the case was no longer just a worried family looking for answers. It had become a police investigation. Detectives immediately began doing what they do in every missing persons case. They spoke to Charity's family, they interviewed friends, they retraced her final known moments and tried to establish exactly what she had been doing before her phone went silent. Naturally, one of the first people investigators wanted to speak to was Paul Aiyedogbon. After all, he wasn't just another friend, he was Charity's boyfriend, the man she had been in a relationship with for about a year. At that stage, police weren't treating Paul as a murderer, they simply wanted information. When had he last seen Charity? What had they discussed? Did she mention traveling anywhere? And was there anyone who might want to hurt her? These were all routine questions. Like everybody else close to Charity, Paul was expected to help investigators piece together the final days before her disappearance. For the moment, the investigation remained exactly what it was, a search for a missing woman. Nobody knew whether Charity was alive or whether she had been abducted. As the weeks turned into months, Charity's family found themselves living in a painful kind of limbo. She hadn't been found and she hadn't come home. There was still no clear answer as to whether she was alive or dead. Every day was another day of waiting. Every phone call brought a tiny bit of hope and every day ended in disappointment. Then the family faced another heartbreaking decision. Charity's eldest daughter Juliet was preparing to get married. It should have been one of the happiest moments of her life. Instead, it became another chapter in the family's nightmare. As news of Charity's disappearance spread across social media, many people began questioning how a wedding could go ahead while the mother was still missing. The criticism grew so intense that Juliet came under heavy public backlash. Eventually, the wedding was postponed indefinitely, not because the family wanted to celebrate without Charity, but because the controversy surrounding her disappearance had completely overshadowed what should have been a joyful occasion. Sadly, the family's ordeal was only just beginning. Across the same time, the investigation and the public conversation took another dramatic turn. A Lagos-based lawyer called Aiyedogbon began publishing a series of Facebook posts in which he claimed Charity's estranged husband David Aiyedogbon was responsible for her disappearance. Those allegations spread rapidly online and shaped public opinion before the police had reached a conclusion. As the accusations spread, David said his reputation, his business relationships, and family were being destroyed. He maintained that he had nothing to do with Charity's disappearance, and even went ahead to say that he was in Turkey when the event took place. According to court filings, he said the online publications were so damaging that they led to severe personal consequences, including the suspension of his daughter's wedding and damage to his standing in the community. Determined to clear his name, David filed a 10 billion naira defamation lawsuit against Emeka Ngwonyi, arguing that allegations were false and had caused enormous harm to his family. While the public argued online and the courtroom battle unfolded, the police quietly continued their investigation, and eventually their evidence led them back to one name: Paul Oswego. For almost 2 years, the case had gone cold. The headlines slowly became less frequent and public attention shifted to newer stories. But for Charity's family, nothing had changed. Every single day, they still woke up without answers. The police, however, hadn't stopped working. Then, in June 2018, everything changed. The FCT Police Command announced that they had arrested Paul, the man Charity had been dating before she disappeared. Alongside Paul, police also arrested another suspect called Manuel Adoga, whom they alleged had helped him carry out this crime. For many Nigerians, it came as a complete shock. For almost 2 years, the public conversations had gone in several different directions. Some believed Charity had been kidnapped, others believed David was responsible. But now, the police were saying the answers had been much closer to home all along. According to investigators, Paul wasn't just Charity's boyfriend. He had become the prime suspect in her disappearance. And then came the confession. Paul's arrest answered one question, but it raised another. What exactly happened to Charity? For nearly 2 years, that question had haunted her family. Now, according to police, they finally had an answer. Now, during a press briefing, police revealed that Paul had confessed. According to investigators, the relationship between Paul and Charity had gradually become entangled with money. Police said that Charity had been financially assisting Paul during their relationship. Like many couples, she had reportedly trusted him enough to lend him money whenever he needed help. But over time, that financial support allegedly became a burden. According to investigators, Paul owed Charity money. As the debt continued to grow, police believe he became increasingly desperate. Instead of finding a way to repay the woman who had stood by him, investigators say he began planning how to eliminate her altogether. Greed had already taken over at this point. Investigators allege that Paul wasn't just interested in avoiding the debt anymore. He also wanted Charity's money, and he wanted her Acura ZDX SUV. Then came the day everything changed. According to Paul's confession, he invited Charity to his home just as he had done on previous occasions. There was nothing unusual about the invitation. To Charity, hey, she was simply going to visit her man. She had absolutely no reason to believe she was walking into a trap. Once Charity arrived, Paul convinced Charity to drink alcohol until she was heavily intoxicated. And then, when she was no longer in a position to defend herself, Paul and Emmanuel attacked her. By the time it was over, Charity was dead. For nearly 2 years, her family had prayed she would come home. Instead, this was the answer they had been searching for. But as disturbing as the murder itself was, what happened next was even more horrifying, because according to police, Paul and Emmanuel dismembered Charity's body before placing her remains into sacks. The sacks were then transported to a riverbank near Ushafa on the outskirts of Abuja, where they were dumped in an attempt to ensure Charity would never be found. As if that was not bad enough, police also alleged that the two men drove away in Charity's Acura ZDX SUV, hoping to profit from the very woman whose trust they had just betrayed. The mystery was finally over, but for Charity's family, there would never be closure, because no confession, no arrest, and no conviction could bring Charity Aiyedogbon back to them. Paul's confession finally gave everyone the answers they had spent nearly 2 years searching for. What had begun as a missing persons case had become a murder investigation, and the woman everyone had prayed would one day walk through her front door was never coming home. Following the arrest, Paul Oswego and Emmanuel Adoga were charged before the High Court of the Federal Capital Territory for their alleged roles in Charity's murder. The legal process would continue for years, as is often the case with serious criminal trials in Nigeria, but regardless of what happened inside the courtroom, one thing could never be changed. Charity was gone. A mother of 4, a businesswoman, a woman who had survived the breakdown of a 15-year marriage and was simply trying to give herself another chance at happiness. Instead, the person she trusted became the person that took everything away from her. When Charity accepted that Facebook request, she couldn't possibly have imagined where it would lead. To her, it was just another conversation, another chance at love, just another person who seemed to care. Unfortunately, it became the beginning of the end. Because that's the thing about monsters. They don't introduce themselves as monsters. They don't walk into your life carrying a weapon. Most of the time, they walk in carrying flowers, a smile, kind word, promises, and they become the very person you trust enough to open your heart to. This is the monster under the bed.